Hamadakyapi Nick Tilsen and Machiapi Chantea Washtenapet Chuzapalo. This is Nick Tilsen and I am your host on LANDBACK for the people. This is season 2, and in this season we have been able to talk about the rebuilding of indigenous food systems in Alaska. We've got to talk about land back right here in the Chesapa. We've got to talk about protecting our sacred homelands from mining destruction. We've raised awareness on this show about the fight for Leonard Peltier as a political prisoner. And today we're going to talk about racism. We're going to talk about the same type of racism that we've seen all across Indian country in border towns throughout this nation, as Indian people are treated like second-class citizens on their own homelands. Whether you're in Gallup, whether you're in Rapid City, the story's the same. People, our relatives, end up on the streets here in these places, mistreated. We often are the economic engines behind these border towns, and we create jobs here, yet we're mistreated and disrespected. But even more so, we're dealing with deep, deep systemic issues. For example, right here in Western South Dakota, Native American children, according to the Marguerite Casey Foundation Kids Count, Native American children in Western South Dakota have the lowest economic and education mobility than any child in America. When we talk about education and economic mobility, what we're talking about is moving on the arc. Moving from early childhood education to graduating college. Native American children have the lowest mobility on that arc. When it comes to income inequality and living in poverty, Native American children have the lowest mobility in the nation. And it's not a surprise with what has been stacked up against Native people here in Western South Dakota. You know, we are 10% of the population of the entire state, but we make up 51% of the people that are incarcerated. Last year in Rapid City area schools, 100% of the expulsions in this community were Indigenous students. Native Americans, for every $1 that a white person has in this country, a Native American person has 8 cents. That represents a 92% racial wealth gap in America. And when you think about the challenges of poverty, right, those aren't just statistics we're talking about. We're talking about actual hardships that Native American people are under. So these are the issues that are systemic. Since the death of George Floyd in 2020, we have seen 6 murders in Rapid City. 100% of those murders have been of police killing Indigenous people. There has not been one charge and not one conviction of any of those. And those are people's lives. Yet we're continuously told that racism doesn't happen to our people and to our community. Enter the Rapid City versus Racism campaign. This campaign is about illuminating the racism that's happening here on the ground and trying to catalyze and bring together both Native and non-Native people and institutions alike to come together to join forces to battle racism in this community. In 2022, there was a hotel, the Grand Gateway Hotel, who, after a shooting at their hotel, in which a young person named Blaine Pooyer lost his life. Rest in peace. Condolences to his family. After that incident, the owners of the hotel said they could not tell the difference between the bad Indians and the good Indians. So we're not going to serve any of them and allow any of them to stay at our hotel. It created a frenzy online. Sure enough, people from NDN Collective and people from the community went all the way to the Grand Gateway Hotel, attempted to rent rooms, and were denied service. What ensued after that was a march and a federal civil rights lawsuit, because when they refused to serve Native American people, they violated the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And so this has been going on for 2 years. On this show, we are going to have updates. We're going to have updates about what's going on with the overall Rapid City versus Racism campaign. We're also going to talk directly about what's happening with this lawsuit. Just within the last 48 hours, or over the weekend, the Retso Corporation, the owner of the Grand Gateway, has filed for bankruptcy. And we're going to get into what that means, how that impacts the lawsuit, and how we continue to work together to battle racism in this community and create better outcomes for our people. Let's get into it. Here we are, Land Back for the People. Season 2, we have some amazing guests on the show today. We're discussing Rapid City versus racism. We're going to be talking about systemic racism in this community and how we are organizing and building power to dismantle it. And we have 2 guests on the show today. We got Sunny Redbear, Hunkpapa, Mini Koju, and Oglala.
All the ones.
All the ones. Basically, Miss Osheti Shakuni over here. And she is the Associate Director of Organizing here. And then we have Eva Cardenas coming at us from Atlanta via Mexico, and is the Director of Organizing here at NDN Collective, and is a big part of what we do here in the community. But I want to give you both a chance to introduce yourself. But I'm asked 2 questions. Introduce yourself to the Oyate, to the people, but also let the people know what led you to organizing.
Okay. Yep. My name is Sunny Redbear. I grew up in Cheyenne River and lived here in Rapid City now for almost 8 years, which is really crazy. Of course, I lived here previously too, but yeah, I feel like I have like a long history of what's led me to organizing. But the biggest thing for me is that I think back to my family's story of all the injustices that played out throughout my family, being put into the foster care system, both of my parents being incarcerated, things like that, just going through the VAWA and through ICWA as a child, and then, going through the abuse I went through as a child, and then prosecuting my abusers, when I was 20 years old. And, those are things that we don't ever come to those things like thinking like these are things I want to do, but then you just have to step up to it. And I think someone told me a long time ago, they said, do what's right because it's right. And that's kind of guided me a lot in my organizing efforts of like standing up for a lot of the injustices I see many of our community members facing now. And I just see myself in a lot of their situations, and I have a lot of empathy of just understanding how heavy those situations are and how much support we need as Indigenous people to be able to not only stand up to but to follow through and, see wins in a personal way too. So it's kind of led me to my work, and I think of like our unhoused relatives, and I mean, I think we all relate to that. When we see our unhoused relatives, we think of a relative that we actually have that's unhoused, and just learning how to really care for our community in the ways that we would want to be cared for. I think a lot of times we forget that a lot of us are only a couple of paychecks away from being unhoused. And that's the reality for most of Americans is that. And so just, being mindful of those things and trying to walk in a good way like that. And yeah, just seeing ourselves in community. So Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing that story. I mean, I think that a lot of times people tend to glamorize organizing and forget that there's human beings with lived experience behind this work, but it also makes it authentic. It's what makes it powerful. When we were having the Camp Mini Luzaha a few years ago, we literally would run into all of our relatives. Like, they weren't just the relatives; they were, shit, that's my cousin right there.
Yeah.
Helping each other out.
Yeah.
But that's power in that too. So thank you for sharing that. Eva, what about you? You've had an interesting journey into, becoming into organizing, and that organizing's brought you all the way up here to Mini Luzaha.
Yeah, it's been a journey that I'm on. Thank you so much for having me, and for being so welcoming into the space. As sort of just kind of echoing and kind of processing what Sunny was naming. I think a lot of us do come into this work to like organize because we kind of have to. It's just kind of a thing. I was born in Mexico, or what we know as the Gran Tenochtitlan, and I lived there for about 10 years until like many of our relatives had to migrate. As the border started to get militarized in the 2000 era, 1999, and so a lot of the mass, or like the head of the households would, it became harder for people to migrate across the border. And so we started to see a high increase of families actually migrating. And so I was in sort of that wave when I was 10. And I ended up in Atlanta because at the time there was a massive wave of construction work that was happening in development. And so that's where our community started to migrate. And I lived in Atlanta for close to 26 years, and then was very privileged to have the opportunity to, meet amazing educational, popular trainers and organizers from different walks of life, and got involved with organizing our immigrant rights. I think one of the things that I share oftentimes is, as someone who learns the language of the systems that we're trying to duplicate and is able to kind of move in this different world, or kind of asked or voluntold, if you will, by our elders to be that supportive role, to help people walk through the process, help people understand how the playing field is, and what the moves are. And so that's kind of how I became involved in organizing. First, it was just through interpreting and being this person hasn't gotten paid, what's going on, or this person got injured. And a lot of it was around status and the idea of who's legal and who isn't, and who gets the rights to have rights, and who has the right to defend those rights. And so there's a lot of working that I had to do in that way. I feel like working class people are the best organizers because they can speak to the real current conditions and are able to know what those solutions are, moving away from sort of the smoke and mirrors of the politics that we see a lot happening here. So that's kind of how I got involved in organizing. And then as I, became older and got a little bit more of opportunities, I was able to organize with the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, which is an organization that's been in Georgia for about 30 years. And a lot of their work is grassroots organizing and building different comité populares, or popular committees, across the deep south of Georgia. And so recognizing that the city, oftentimes our community migrates to the city because of the opportunities of employment and economy, but it's also where they're more vulnerable for attacks from the police and from other different systems, and potentially have less protections and resources to support. And so one of the work that Glar was doing a lot was just around how do we create these pockets of resistance across the deep south? How are we talking to people about what's happening at a national level, and how do we break it down for people to understand how it impacts at the local level? And then as I was just kind of growing and organizing, I came across amazing people like Marty and Sai, and they were the ones that started talking to me about direct action and all the shenanigans I could get into. And so then I kind of started to get more involved in that. I will say though, as a child of immigrant parents, or as someone that considers themselves to have an immigrant experience, I feel like there has been a lot of displacement in sort of my history and understanding of where my people come from. And so I felt at a very young age that I wanted to learn more about it, and knowing that the mainstream media, those spaces don't really have adequate information, or they're speaking from their lens. And so it's very different. I feel very fortunate to be able to be in community with you all, because I feel I'm able to at least try to reconnect in a way that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. And so I think for me, the last thing I'll say about my organizing journey, I think that organizing hasn't just been for me like to support my people in like their liberation, but it's also been very liberating for myself. I feel like the work that we do, it's both like what's his name? Joe Scott, who says the revolution will not be televised. I think that there's often people just grab that and it's like that's the punchline. But I think that there's something deeper that he goes into that aspect, which is the, you know, revolution is as much as internal as it is external, and like the importance for us to be able to decolonize, to like move from those like systems that we've been raised and kind of like brainwashed to a certain degree, or indoctrinated into a certain degree to move. We need to be able to like unengage from those things to be able to then have a clear vision of how we're supporting people and where we sometimes get caught up on, you know. So I think I love organizing. I think our people have the solutions to the issues. I think, you know, there's a reason why we continue to see repression in all kinds of angles. I think there's a unspoken unspoken power that the opposition refuses to acknowledge, but also does acknowledge it by the way it treats us and continues to kind of like block the ways that we're trying to move. And so I'm excited to see, to continue to see the development of our people, for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, as an organizer, I love to hear the origins of people's organizing stories and how they have developed their analysis and how because it directly informs the work that we do now, you know. We're going to jump into talking specifically about what's going on here in Rapid City. You know, a lot of the racism that you see in Rapid City, you see in a lot of urban towns throughout America, but it's very specific type of racism as it relates to border towns. You know, when we speak of border towns, we're actually talking about towns that border Indian reservations and Indian communities, because these towns really exist because the tribes, the reservations, and the native communities are the economic engines behind them for them to exist. But they're extractive. They're extractive of taking resources off the res, but then our people get treated like second-class citizens on their own homelands in their own community. I'm always quick to remind everybody that this place that we're in up here is called Mini Luzaha. Mini is water, Luzaha is swift. Rapid City got its name after what we call this place as Lakota people for thousands of years. And it is the same Lakota people that are along that creek down there that are unsheltered. We've been there for thousands of years. Yet our people get treated like second-class citizens in this community, and I think it's important to let the folks know what's going on here. What are some of the things that you're seeing, that you're experiencing in this community?
Yeah, I think it's a loaded question. There's a lot to unpack with Rapid City. And I think that we're just now kind of, you know, exploring like the tip of the iceberg as far as like how in depth and how deeply rooted, you know, we're seeing the symptoms, you know, we're seeing the racism, the blatant racism within different institutions, how they're playing out right now, right? But it's like so deeply rooted. And a lot of it lives like in the subconscious, like in a lot of the biases that have been, you know, planted and are now like really festering and creating these symptoms. And so, you know, we have racism that exists in every institution, every system within Rapid City, and we're seeing it play out. And what's really interesting is, you know, we've been organizing around different efforts here locally for a long time, whether that's with our unhoused relatives, with our children in the schools, whether that's with the police department and the violence that our people have experienced there. And it's been very interesting that we have these lived experiences and we have story after story and we hear our family stories. And then all of a sudden, you know, DOJ or the Office of Civil Rights, they'll come in and they'll do a report and an investigation, and then they come out with this data, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is real. This actually exists. And that's when people start to listen. And I think that like we've been screaming at the top of our lungs for a very long time what's happening to us as Indigenous people here on our own homelands. And people are still reluctant to listen, even in spite of, federal, Department of Justice or the Office of Civil Rights, like laying out facts around what is happening in Rapid City. Whether that's
Let's stop there for 1 second, because I think this is a key thing when it comes to racism.
Yeah.
Is why. Just like, why is it? Let's just unpack this a little bit. When a Native person literally experiences something and then says, this happened to me, and then immediately it's like, yeah, I don't know if that happened to you. I don't know if that actually happened. Why is that? Like, let's get down to like the psyche of it for a second. Actually, I want to hear both of your responses to that, and then we'll keep going.
That's a hard question. That's really hard. I think that, I mean, obviously we've all experienced that. It's like the belittling, the minimizing, and a lot of it is just because they don't want to face the reality. They don't want to see our reality, because then they have to be accountable to it and be accountable to the part that they play in it and how they continue to uphold that oppression in various different ways in which they're not ready to address. They're not ready to talk about. And I think that what that does is it ends up just like gaslighting us into, taking away from our own experiences, lived experiences as human beings. It dehumanizes us. And even though a lot of people, I mean, there's a lot of good people out there, and I don't think that everybody has bad intentions. And I think there are really solid people that really want to do good. But that internal work is heavy and it's hard. And there's a lot of people that aren't willing to do that right now. And so I hope that, we can get to that place where we can start actually seeing eye to eye and having real conversations where, like, people are looking at us like we are equals, that we have the intelligence, that we have the processes, that, that we mirror each other. And so, but that's kind of what I think of is it, for whatever reason, it always comes back to accountability. Being principled in that way. So,
what about you, Eva? What is your thoughts on that?
Capitalism. Yeah, I mean, I do think it's...
Get into it. Talk about capitalism.
I do think that it is I think we live in a country whose history is founded on like genocide. It's founded on creating sort of these caste systems or racial systems to be able to then, through either religion, right, say this is why we're doing it, or through like the consumption of like labor of Black people and Indigenous people when it first was founded. I think that there's one, like, this country is heavily racialized. I think it is sort of one of their foundational kind of arguments, if you will, as to how and why they kind of moved the way that they moved. I think part of what you're naming, Sunny, around like the reckoning of like confronting that actual history, right? I think Americans in particularly suffer from like, we're the best, America's number one, and sort of this idea that we can never do anything wrong. And so I think when we're raised that way to believe that we're perfect, that we're like the first nation in everything, that we're the strong nation, then you kind of create this idea.
We're the best democracy
right,
in the world.
That we're a democracy, that like freedom is here. We're kind of like raised in a bubble. And then it's very interesting to see how the right, but also the left, I think like both the Republicans and the Democrats are part of the same coin, but they're very good at using fear to like pivot people against one another. They're very quick to use economic opportunities to pivot, I mean, if you look at what Orangeman is saying right now, right? Like this whole thing around like they're taking Black jobs and like trying to pivot or like pit immigrant folks against Black folks. Like that's a very clear tactic that I feel like oftentimes they use, and that's how they keep power. And so I think for it, a lot of it is like, how is the current institutions holding and continue to hold that power by propagating this lie that they had to like use to be able to build this country. And I think the onus I mean, I think there's a responsibility both on them, but I think the onus is also on us as individuals, right? To like be able to, we now have the internets. Like the internets can take you anywhere. And like if you actually did want to know more about the history, if you actually did want to challenge some of those points, that's the onus for us to do that research to like actually become decolonized. And kind of what you're saying, there's like a level of accountability, a level of effort that unless you're actually aware of it, you're not going to take that step, right? And so it's, I think like my biggest thing with that is just like, as Indigenous folks, what we're asking non-Native folks is not to come and save us, but to actually like go talk to your aunties, go talk to your, you know, grandpa that's racist as hell. Like go challenge them on those things. Like organize your communities. We don't need you to come and organize Native communities. We need you to go and organize your own white communities who are fragile as fuck, who have issues, who aren't clear on the history of it, who like just read something off TikTok or Facebook and then they go off of that. Like challenge them on those things, because in real time, this is how policy is getting made. In real time, based on those lies, based on those foundational smokes and mirrors, that's how we're sort of propagating the genocide right now, right? Like you look even at how they're talking about this genocide as a war, like that reframes everything.
I think about that all the time. You know, I grew up in Porcupine, 3.5 miles from Wounded Knee, and in my lifetime, I remember on the sign down there when it said "Battle at Wounded Knee." I mean, I'm 42. So in my lifetime, that sign, the historical marker sign on there said "Battle at Wounded Knee." I remember when they put the plaque over the top that said "Massacre." You know, like, and just started, you know, talking about those things. You know, I think the other thing, I remember this, and this memory came up as you were talking. As I was probably about 9 years old, I had an elder in my community. There was this flag waving. And he was looking at this flag, and he said, "Do you know what that flag means to me?" And I was like, "I don't know. What does it mean? What does it mean to you?"
Tell me more.
And he said, "Well, the red stripes on that flag represent the spilt blood of my ancestors and our ancestors, and the white stripes and the stars represent all of the land that was taken from our people and all the white people who now live on it. Every time I see the flag, that's what I see. So I don't pledge allegiance to the flag. I don't stand up and I don't put my hand on my heart." I was like 9 years old, and I'd been around some conversations and been around the movement and resistance. But this elder breaking down how they view that flag and the symbolism of it was always had a lasting effect on me. Had a lasting effect on me because it hits at the bedrock of like how we think about society, how we think about America, and how we think about the so-called American democracy. Because the reality is many of the things that this country, in rhetoric that this country does talk about when it comes to liberty, equality, equal justice for all, it's really not, it's not truthful. It's not honest. And I think that when we all know that when things aren't truthful and aren't honest, the problematic things from that will come to roost. And I think that's what's happening nowadays. I think that people are uprising throughout the whole country and have been for quite some time.
You can't unknow what you know.
Once you know.
You know.
Yeah.
We'll jump into it. We're gonna jump into a little bit more about what's happening in Rapid City. We're gonna talk about the civil rights lawsuit. We're gonna talk about organizing that's going on right here. And we're gonna talk about this madness of this Retzel Corporation filing for bankruptcy, but seems like we got them on the run. So we're back here, Mini Luzaha, breaking down what's happening in this community as far as racism. And, we've talked about the school to prison pipeline. We've talked about the lack of economic and education mobility of Native American children. We've talked about the over-policing that's happening in this community. And also, we've talked about the mistreatment of our unsheltered relatives. It's systemic, right? So Native American children, elders, everybody in this community is feeling in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And it was in these conditions, right? In these conditions that a culture exists, a culture of racism. And when there's not a calling out of the racism that exists here, well, it allows it to prosper. Mm-hmm. It allows it to be normalized. Mm-hmm. It allows it to be normal. Oh, well, the cops killed another Native American today. Mm-hmm. Another Native American was found in the creek. 100% of the expulsions from Rapid City area schools are all Indigenous. Mm-hmm. It just becomes the normalized. And then white people in the community say, man, what is going on with the Native American community here? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they don't see that. And that's where we were kind of leaving off of why that is, the implicit and explicit biases that live deeply in society. All of these collective conditions boiled up in this community to this incident that happened in 2022 with the Grand Gateway Hotel. Sonny, do you want to talk a little bit about what happened with the Grand Gateway Hotel in 2022 and what happened at that time?
Yeah. Well, how far back do we want to go? I mean, there's a lot to it. Now that it's 2.5 years, past. But basically, the owners made racist comments saying, they couldn't tell a good Indian from a bad Indian, and also that they weren't going to serve Indians anymore, and they were no longer allowed on the property of the Grand Gateway Hotel. That was one thing, and it's one thing to say those things, but then I went there to rent a room, and I was denied. I was denied a room. So they put action to what they said, and so we filed a federal lawsuit, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They violated the civil rights of Native American people, and it wasn't just me. There was other people involved in this lawsuit. It was a class action, including Indian Collective, and so we went forward with that lawsuit, really just challenging and also I think that it's really important to speak to the privilege that we have as far as like having the resources to be able to move through this lawsuit. There's been generations of people being discriminated by that business in particular, but all throughout Rapid City, and like businesses too. So, moving forward with this lawsuit, really, I think what it did is like it showed that we're no longer going to be putting up with the ways that we're being treated, and that we have the ability to fight back. We have the intelligence, we have the resources, and we're going to challenge these things, And so we did. We've been going through this litigation for 2.5 years, and on Monday we were supposed to start the trial, and we were looking forward to it. I think it was supposed to be like our day in court to be able to share our story about what happened, and to give detail to that story, and allowing our community to have to take part in that, as well. So yeah, and that's what led up to what now them filing for bankruptcy, to stall the proceedings, which has been just such an interesting tactic, to really delay the inevitable, So
yeah, I was going to say that I think I think that when you think about these business owners and these bad actors, just like we talked about before, like they're interested in, saving their business. They're interested, but it's so crazy because everything they're doing is contrary to that. Mm-hmm. For folks that are listening and folks that are watching, Rapid City is a regional town. And as rural regional towns go, the amount of resources and money that exchanges hands in this community is exponentially larger than the people that live here. We might be about 78,000 people here in Rapid City, but the stores and the infrastructure here, supports probably closer to 145,000 people. I mean, in a small town like this, we got 2 huge Walmarts, right?
And a Target.
Because the culture is this, when you're coming from Cheyenne River, you're coming from Rosebud, Pine Ridge, Standing Rock, Newcastle, wherever. Even if you're a rancher, a lot of times what both Indian and non-Indian people are doing in Rapid City is they're coming here on a Friday after work. They're coming on here a Friday after work. They're probably having a birthday party for their family because there's no services anywhere else, probably on that Saturday. And then when they go home, they're probably going to be taking groceries, supplies, feed, tools, whatever else is needed. And so this town is a heartbeat for this whole region, where if you look on a map, it's South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and Nebraska. People forget about the regional nature of this town, the economic impact that it has. So with all these hotels in town, all of the surrounding communities use these hotels. They use these hotels to convene their families, to have their birthday parties in. It's part of the culture of this place. And, for a hotel to deny Native American people the access who contribute so much to the economy here, who are part of the heartbeat of this, the culture of this community, is completely disrespectful, and it's illegal. And I think that, the efforts around this lawsuit illuminated the fact that this has gone too far. I mean, I remember even seeing other non-Native people in this community be outraged over this. And even though they had not seen themselves as perpetuating racism before, So this is where we find ourselves at. I want to reflect a little bit, just because, you spent time in the deep South. And it really is the effort of the civil rights movement in the Deep South that led to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Can you talk a little bit about the historical context of why the Civil Rights Act needed to be created in the first place? Because I think sometimes we need to remember, we're in 2024, but a lot of people organized, sacrificed. Some people even lost their lives for the Civil Rights Act to be in existence today.
Yeah, so I can definitely speak from some of the things that I know. I'm not a historical major, so I might get my details. Please don't come for me. But yeah, I mean, I think when you were speaking, one of the things that comes up for me is what Kwame Ture said, Stokely Carmichael mentioned about the civil rights movement. So Stokely Carmichael was a very amazing organizer who oftentimes talked and worked a lot with like the SNCC movement, who were the Student Committee for Nonviolence that was going towards the Deep South to get people registered to vote. Some of their comrades were killed by white supremacists and Klans folks that felt like the voting shouldn't be a thing that Black folks should have in the South. And I think there were a lot of different issues similar to what we're talking about, right? Like the not ability to be able to be in certain spaces that white people were able to be in, the ability to sit in the front of the bus, like the ability to be treated as a regular person, similar to other white folks, that was not insistent for Black folks, Native folks, and other folks that were non-white. And so the civil rights movement, I think one of the things that Stokely Carmichael named that I still remember to this day is that the civil rights movement wasn't really written for Black folks. It was written for white folks to let them know you can no longer kill someone for voting. You can no longer deny people the access. So I think a lot of people sometimes think that the civil rights is like it was for people, and it is for people to some degree, but it was actually more for like the white folks who didn't understand, like, yo, you can't no longer do this. Like, this is legally now not a thing that you can do. And I think when we're framing things, it's important for us to know that like our people died and fought in the South for things that they knew that they had the right to. But it was just these particular people in positions of power that felt otherwise. And that then we had to kind of play by those rules to say, actually, now it's illegal for you to like do this. Now you can't do that, right? And just because we have that bill doesn't mean, like we've obviously seen people don't really abide by that. They don't, again, when you are a person that has always been told that you know the best, that you are here in this role to like dominate, then you can do no wrong. And so it creates this idea of like, I know best when you really don't. And so I think for me, when we think about the civil rights movement, and the last thing the other thing that I'll add to this, like that was like 125 years ago, maybe like it wasn't that long ago. And I think sometimes people kind of forget. People like tend to think about like, oh, this was like a long, long time ago when we had people, the busing of schools, like the integration of schools. Like I know people whose parents are like 70, 50, years old, and they had to experience that. So like that's just that's just around the corner. And so I think when we talk about this like condition of like moving forward, we need to remember that the past is just right behind us, and we can't get comfortable, right? And I think particularly white folks or folks who have privilege oftentimes have to like be uncomfortable, and so then that requires them to question. And so I'm not sure if that fully answers the question, but what I would say in the civil rights movement, like that is an ongoing process. It didn't stop. We saw what we were able to gain from people organizing and mobilizing. We saw how fast the powers of this country, or the so-called country, how they attacked and murdered leadership, how they went and they continue to like use different tactics up to this date. They might have shifted the name, they might have rebranded a couple of things, but it continues to be the same tactic of how do we take down leadership, how do we create fissures within different movements, how do we pivot people against one another, how do we create conditions that are so stagnant and so unbearable that people are then just forced to work and focus on working so that they can't focus on their like natural conditions to change things right now. And so I think it's important for us to understand that the Civil Rights Bill was just like a spear, if you will, of an opening of space, but the work continues. And what we're seeing right now with their tactics, what we're seeing with the tactics from the state, like to Stop Cop City, like the Stop Cop City movement, like all of these tactics are very colonial in nature, and they've just kind of been repackaged to try to like go after our people. And to me, I think that's what also speaks power to our power, to be like, oh, we're like, you're willing to do all of these things, to bend the law in all kinds of ways, to ensure that we don't make it through. And so I think that's what I like. That's what I think about it. So I don't know if that answers.
No, it totally answers it. I mean, I think that like I really like the framing that, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, was in fact created, to hold white people accountable and to protect people of color. And, that's why the continuation of this particular lawsuit is in that same nature. This is not about, quote unquote, protecting the rights of Native American people or advancing those rights. Those rights are inherent to us already because this is our homelands. This is about holding them accountable. This is about saying that you operate under the laws of the United States, and these laws were created to hold you accountable. And so we're continuing that. And when you see the dichotomy of this, when we talk about capitalism in America, I mean, the fact that a bankruptcy filing, an administrative, bankruptcy filing can take precedent over a civil rights lawsuit, meaning that you cannot move forward with a civil rights lawsuit while you're under bankruptcy. It just screams the fact that this country prioritizes
profit.
Capitalism over human rights. I mean, there's a direct reflection of that we're seeing happening right here, but it's delayed, but it's not over. The fight to hold them accountable is not over. And quite frankly, the fact that they are going through bankruptcy proceedings says that they're suffering, says that they have been impacted by the organizing and have been impacted by the things that people in this community are refusing to turn the other cheek. Can you talk about that a little bit, Sunny?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's been it's been a long time coming, but just speaking to like say like the boycott that we had afterwards. It's the first boycott I had ever organized and been a part of. And when we first went out there, and I think I've spoke about this before, but like when we first went out there, I was like ready for like people to be throwing stuff at us and like, just ready for it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you have people driving by honking and like,
war whooping out the window.
But like allies too.
Yeah.
Allies being like, that was effed up. And like, that's not us. And making those different stances. And so like that is the origin story of Rapid City versus racism is, during that time is when we drew that line in the sand and we provided an opportunity for our community to take a stand against racism and to choose how are you going to move in this community? How are you going to support Indigenous people? Are you going to take part in the things that we organize? Are you going to, break out of the mold? Are you going to challenge yourself as an individual? And I think we started creating ways that our community could just start plugging in. And I think that the education and the mindsets, everything was starting to evolve, And so it created a really cool opportunity for us to come together in, as a community and unify against racism.
Can you talk about that just a little bit more about like some of the goals of the Rapid City versus Racism campaign?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge umbrella of just addressing systemic racism, right? It's a big goal, but we've been able to
just
break it down.
Just working on small things over
just
here,
little things. Yeah. But we've broken it down into 3 different buckets of work, and our focuses are around the Rapid City area schools, supporting and protecting our students and the families, and then we also have we're demanding an investigation from the DOJ into the Rapid City Police Department with the violence and the killing of Native people, and then we also have the Grand Gateway trial, which is a part of the just like the narrative, the story about, the racism that exists. And, we're talking a lot about the trial right now, but like I said yesterday in our press conference, like it's just such a small part of our work, and it's helping to, teach our community around.
It's more like a tactic than
Yeah. And so it's more around having the opportunities to be able to have these conversations with our community. But those are the things that we're working on directly. And like I said before, we've been organizing around these things for a while, but it's really crazy how like things are just starting to line up, the OCR investigation and report by the Rapid City area schools and really digging into that and, teaching our community how they can plug into that and showing up at the school board meetings and things like that. So like a listening session today at 5:30 at Central High School, that's an opportunity for us to fight, having police in our schools and the criminalization of our students. And so it's all about trying to bring our community with us and trying to educate and, learning from each other too in these moments.
Yeah. And if I could just add something, I think that this campaign is important because I think going just kind of back to the narrative and so how some people oftentimes move from just like the ways that they've been taught. And I think people oftentimes or when they think of racism, they think of images from back in the 60s, right? Like they think that the throwing of things, the actively yelling, the active signs, but the racism oftentimes shifts into like these very different, it monetarizes, right? Like it gets repackaged. And so now it's like the needing to have a police force to take care of our children, right? Yeah. And like how the narrative that they use from sort of these racist thoughts and tendencies to then say this is why we need to have police, or the idea that, natives are less than human and therefore they shouldn't have access to these things, or kind of what you named, Nick, of like, well, why are they struggling? I'm not struggling, right? But so again, it's about like having to be uncomfortable, and I think part of that campaign is to be able to push that conversation, because unless you're talking about it and you're not confronting it, right? Like if you're not actually having to question why is it that white people here have way more resources than Native folks. Like, why is that discrepancy? And it isn't because, and I know that Republicans love to say that's like a personal failing of an individual, but we don't live in bubbles. Like, all of our conditions, all of the actions that happen within this country impact all of us. And so I think when people try to be like, well, it's your issue, kind of the gaslighting thing, like, people should question why they feel like they gotta gaslight someone around their current conditions, because we don't. Last I checked, and I don't own stock market. Like, last I checked, I'm not making the legislation. I'm not drafting bills. My signature on a bill is not going to make it a law. And so, like, obviously, like, I don't have that kind of power to then decide. Like, people don't decide to be unhoused. People don't decide to be poor. Like, so I think it's very clear that, like, these campaigns exist to push that, to, like, question those things, because oftentimes when people come from privilege and are comfortable, they're not going to question those things, right? And so there's, I think, that's also the importance of why people organize and being able to give that space for people to be able to mobilize and stuff.
And then, like, speaking to that, it's also around, like, the accountability of the policies and practices that they have created for themselves. Like, they're the ones that created it, and yet they're the ones that are breaking it. And so it's, like, kind of like, wait a second, we're following all these rules, and we're having to jump through the hoops, but y'all are bypassing them.
And you get to change the hoops. They get to be able to be like, oh.
Well, and I think that's the story, right? I mean, that's the story how Indian people have been treated all across this country since the beginning of its creation. I mean, like, all of the laws, right? All of the laws and all the political system, the federal agencies, these things were created for the purpose of stealing Indigenous people's lands, enslaving our Black brothers and sisters, and creating the conditions to maintain the theft of our land and the extraction of those resources. I mean, so that when we talk about land back, I mean, this show is about land back, and it's why we're talking about systemic racism and land back at the same time, is because land back is holding up a mirror to the system. Land back is holding up a mirror to the system that continues to oppress people in this country. Without the stealing of Indigenous people's land in these systems, we would not have to navigate these systems. The wealth that was created in this country was created off of land and at the core of land. So every rancher out there who says, well, I worked hard. I worked hard. Nobody's saying you didn't work hard, but the conditions that you directly benefited from were on the backs of other people. There was oppression that happened that created the opportunity for you to work hard and get ahead.
And continues to uphold that.
Yeah, and they're not going to challenge those either. Of course right? Not. The one, they're not going to challenge what's benefiting them.
And I think that we're also not saying that they are the enemy. We're also not saying those who work hard are the enemy. I mean, to be clear, like to the white folks out there that are directly benefiting from the stolen lands of Indigenous people, we are not saying that you are the enemy. We are not coming for your yard. We're not coming for your ranch. We're not coming for those things. What we're saying is that we got to create a more just and equitable world for all people and Mother Earth. And the current system in place is not working.
And we can't have that without like being clear and honest about things, because that's like people want to shy away from that.
Yeah, they don't want to have the real conversations, and I think that's where we've got to get. Like we want to talk about building a multiracial democracy or whatever big words. At the end of the day, it's about creating a world that works for people, for all of us together, because the current system is not working.
It's not.
There should not be anybody in this country living on the street. There should not be anybody who doesn't have food to eat. There actually is enough to provide for the people that are here, and the future is here. It's just not equally distributed. And that brings us to where we're at now. And so I commend the efforts that are happening here, because I do believe that the things that are happening here on the ground, they mirror what's happening all across this country.
Yeah, totally.
And in closing, I want to give you the opportunity, both of you, the opportunity to let people know how they can support the Rapid City versus Racism campaign. How can they get involved? And how can they support the work, whether they're here in this community or whether they're throughout the country?
I think like one of the biggest things that I would encourage, you know, we're still trying to hold, you know, the DOJ accountable, and, you know, ask. Basically, you know, last year they said that they're going to prioritize the protection of civil rights of Indigenous people, you know, in this administration, and we're really asking them to show up. I think that, you know, Rapid City, you know, we're showing them what is happening here, and we need them to act, you know, and to do their job. And so as a community, we're asking them to come here and do an investigation into the police department. And so anyone that wants to support that effort, writing letters and asking the DOJ to do this investigation, anyone that has stories of violence or discrimination or violation of civil rights here in Rapid City and the surrounding area, please come visit us, talk to us, reach out to us, write your own letter. They need to hear from our entire community and not just Indian Collective. And also, you know, the other aspect of the work is the Rapid City area schools. You know, the Office of Civil Rights, they came out with that investigation, and they've listed so many different ways that our community can have input and to have their voice heard. And so showing up at the listening sessions, you know, just being involved, being active, and, you know, asking questions. And so, reaching out to us. We have a lot of good information on our website that kind of outlines. We also have a mass text that kind of gives updates on what's happening in the community and how to be involved as well. And I believe that's Rapid v Racism that you can text. And so, yeah, just different ways that you can plug in as far as like the work, that active work that's happening right now that I can think of. But yeah.
Yeah. I'm hoping we get some magic, and then we can just kind of maybe link the different socials, but like asking folks that are not Rapid locals to like join us on our socials, join our Facebook, subscribe to our listservs. We're sending out newsletters around like the policy and organizing work that we're doing to communities so that they're aware about it, and following our socials for like calls to actions both locally and here. I think in general, I do want to encourage people, as Sunny said, to get involved in your local conversations, in your local elections, like in school boards. I think a lot of people oftentimes think like, oh, if we just vote for the right candidate up at the top, then everything will be nice and fresh. And the reality is like it starts at the bottom. And so we have to be able to be in those places to like peep what they're moving, peep how they're kind of like continuing to like hoard that power, like what are the different plan games that they're making to get more profit. Like folks need to understand that. Folks need to be more active in their elections. Folks need to be running some of these tickets. Like I think it's all hands on deck, and I think that requires both finding your people in your community, finding those that like are political family that are aligned with your values, holding that like principle struggle of like we don't have to agree with everything, but we do need to be aligned in how we're moving and where we're going, and to like read, listen, like be active in how you're like evolutionizing in your own like political education, because I mean my grandma used to tell me, you know, like if you let them, they'll give you atole con el dedo, they'll give you like drink with the finger, and they'll say that they fed you. Like, and the reality is that we need to be able to be in these positions of power, and the way we do that is by staying active, by organizing, by continuing to mobilize, and being very clear as to like what does liberation look like for me in my community. How do I find my people in my community to get to that? Like how are we like claiming back our power? How are we claiming back our time? And it's a long struggle, it's a hard struggle, but it's the righteous struggle. And you know, it speaks power that the fact that all of the things that they've done since they arrived here, we're still here.
We're still here.
We'll be here forever. So come through.
We're not going anywhere.
We're not going anywhere. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate both of you coming onto the show, unpacking, systemic racism, unpacking what the Rapid City versus Racism campaign is doing. To all of the people out there who have been following this campaign, who have been following what happened with the Grand Gateway, stay tuned. We are not giving up on this fight. We're going to continue to hold them accountable, and also I want to say that it's really important for people to support this work financially too. Organizing and doing this work is not it's not cheap, and it costs resources to do so. And so asking people to donate, that resources will go to support the Rapid City versus Racism campaign and the work happening on the ground here in the community. and stay tuned for future developments. And for the businesses and those who have been upholding racism in this community, I think it's pretty clear that the community has said we're not going anywhere, that we're here to stay, that there is a cost. There's a cost of racism. It'll cost you your business. It'll cost you your job. It'll cost you your livelihood, because the people here, we have experienced injustice for far too long. And we're here to stay for the long haul. And to our allies, remember that there's an opportunity for you to join us in this struggle. For we will not achieve liberation without our allies and our accomplices, because our liberation is collectively bound up with one another. So thank both of you for coming on the show. This was Land Back for the People, and this was about Rapid City versus racism.